에코포럼이 어느덧 9번째 맞게 됐습니다. 말씀해주신 분께서는 익히 알고 계시는 분도 계시겠지만 많은 분들이 처음 접한다고 생각할 수 있겠습니다.
Thank you very much. It's a tremendous honor to be here. I arrived in Korea about 2 weeks ago, and ever since then I've been having an absolutely fantastic time. People have been very warm and very generous. William Nathan Berry was born in 1914 in Greensboro, North Carolina, the third oldest of 13 children. He entered the Congregation of the Passion of Jesus Christ, commonly known as the Passionists, in 1933, at which time he adopted the name of Thomas, due to his affection for the work of the great philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas. He was ordained in 1942. After completing a doctorate at the Catholic University of America on the historical theory of the philosopher and historian Giambattista Vico, Berry traveled to China in 1948 to study and teach at Fujian University in Beijing, but was forced to return to America with the rise of Mao Zedong. Nevertheless, Berry continued studies in Asian languages and cultures, eventually becoming proficient in the languages of Chinese, Sanskrit, and Pali, as well as Latin, Italian, Spanish, and German. He taught graduate programs at Seton Hall University. Particularly, he served as president of the American Teilhard Association from 1975 to 1987. Through both of these endeavors, his international reputation as an innovative thinker, writer, and lecturer grew, eventually culminating in the 11-volume set of the Riverdale Papers, as well as 8 books and innumerable articles. He received 8 honorary doctorates during his lifetime and many, many awards. He died on June 1st, 2009. This is a memorial statue where he is buried. It's St. Francis, and there's a plaque here commemorating Tom Berry. This is in Vermont. Berry is known not only as a cultural historian, but as a commentator on the intellectual and spiritual history of the 20th and 21st century. His concern for the environment and his interpretation of the contemporary scientific story of the creation and the development of the universe, commonly called the New Cosmology, the Universe Story, or the Epic of Evolution, caused him to become one of the most influential voices in not just ecological theology, but also an influential voice in the study of religions, economics, politics, ethics, and even the arts. His work influenced the theological scholarship of Sally McFaig, Rosemary Bradford Ruther, Dennis Edwards, and John Hott, to name but a few, and such scholars of the study of world religions as Mary Evelyn Tucker, John Grimm, Beatrice Brutto, Jay McDaniel, Ted DeBerry, and Christopher Chappell, among others, as well as ethicists such as Paul Waldo and Larry Rasmussen, political economists such as David Korten and John B. Cobb, Jr., politicians as former Vice President Al Gore, jurists such as Mike Bell, Martin S. Kaplan, and Brian Brown, activist authors such as Satish Kumar and Joanna Macy, Charlene Spretnak, and Ellen LeConte, artists such as Paul Winter, Mary Southard, and Catherine Deegan. His influence has been diverse and rich as his scholarship. Thomas Berry recognized that the status quo is simply not sustainable since we are increasingly bringing about the destruction of the planet. A pathological understanding of the human and our place in creation has allowed us to precipitate such destruction and to dissociate ourselves from God's creation. Every human culture has fashioned a cosmological vision that explained who we are, how we came to be, how the cosmos was organized, and how we fit into that order. For example, the early Christian theologians adopted the cosmological vision of Plato when seeking to understand and describe the Christ event. A cosmological vision helps us to make sense of our current reality. The cosmological vision that dominated when humanity began to destroy the life systems of the planet in such an unprecedented way operated with a human-centered norm of reality and value. Even when post-Copernican science informed us that the Earth, and therefore the human, was no longer the center of the universe, we continued to act as if this was the case. And even with our growing awareness of an evolving, interdependent universe, we continue to act as if we were separate from and immune to Earth's destruction, and that the universe lacked any sacred quality. We lived by a dysfunctional cosmological vision and a dysfunctional spirituality that provided the context for the ecological crisis. I should point out that when Thomas Berry was writing this part of his work was directed at Western society, that this was the dominant cosmological view in Western society that drove Western values and Western economics, therefore resulting in the ecological destruction that comes from those attitudes. Thomas Berry identified the need for a more functional cosmological vision and spirituality, a cosmological vision that informs how we fit into the order of the universe, discerning right and wrong behaviors with respect to that order, so that we can act in ways that enhance rather than destroy the planet on which we depend. At present, we are between stories because we are shifting from a pre-Copernican cosmology that continues to inform our behavior to a new epoch of evolution that has not yet sufficiently penetrated our culture to fundamentally revise our values and our behaviors on all levels in support of a more earth-centered and earth-friendly way of being. When we adopt a new cosmological vision, we need to discern its implications for human behavior. This is perhaps one of the most significant contributions of Berry's work, to provide an interpretation of the universe story that awakens us to the implications of adopting that story as our new cosmological vision. This new context of meaning supports the reinvention of the human on all levels. Berry summarizes our situation in 3 succinct sentences. I'm going to play a little video clip so that you can hear what Thomas Berry sounds like and see what he's like. He was about 84 when this was taken.
Proposition I can put in 3 sentences. In the 20th century, the glory of the human has become the desolation of the earth. Second sentence, the desolation of the earth is becoming the destiny of the human. Third sentence, all human institutions, professions, programs, and activities that must now be judged primarily by the extent to which they inhibit, ignore, or foster a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship. Now that is the goal, a mutually enhancing mode of human presence on the planet Earth.
We will consider the implications of Barry's cosmological vision for theology, economics, and ethics. We can ask how theology, economics, and ethics might foster a mutually enhancing human-Earth relationship. Barry develops Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's view that the universe has had a psychic-spiritual dimension from its inception 13.7 billion years ago, not just a physical material manifestation. That is, just as the universe's physical dimension evolves to greater diversity and complexity, so it is with the universe's spiritual dimension. Spirituality does not come into existence fully formed with the appearance of the human in the universe story. It has lesser evolved precursors. We can recall how, in the first Genesis creation story, the breath of God, Ruach, hovered over the chaos and brought order into creation. As Barry succinctly notes, spirit brings form to matter. Where there is order and form, it is because there is spirit. From the first moment of the universe story, in the midst of the emergence of the primal singularity, there was spirit bringing form to matter. And that presence, that divine immanence, continues to this day. The psalmist reminds us of this when it was written, "When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the earth." Consequently, the universe story is a sacred story where all elements of creation are part of a single sacred community. The immanent breath of God, who mediates the divine communion to creation, draws all of creation into a single God-loved community, offering to be a healer of differences by creating mutually enhancing reciprocity. Thus, the exploitation of the weak by the strong cannot abide. The polarization of the human against the other than human cannot abide. Overconsumption and greed cannot abide. However, aligning with the humbled and hungry, the thirsty and the sick, whether human or other than human, abides with the Spirit. This Spirit is not merely an interanimating force in creation, but is enfleshed within that creation while not transforming creation into spirit. Just as through the cross and the humanity of Christ, God shares with solidarity in our suffering, so too the Spirit, enfleshed in creation, makes known to God the suffering of ecological destruction. Just as the Eucharistic blood from Christ's crucifixion nourishes the faithful, so too does the Spirit's suffering through ecological devastation provide a source of hope for those who experience environmental desolation. Both Christ and the Spirit seek the salvation and healing of creation through solidarity with the creation that they created and continue to sustain. By recalling that Christ is not only Redeemer, but also Creator, we recognize that Christ has guided and sustained all 13.7 billion years of cosmogenesis, not just the very brief history of humanity. That divine immanence took on a radically transformative dimension with Christ's incarnation. Jesus of Nazareth, as a human, was formed from stardust that had been evolving for 13.7 billion years. He was made flesh with the same material of which we and all creation have been and are made. God's self-communication throughout creation history, took on a paradigmatic pinnacle with the incarnation. Christ is the one being of creation who completely accepted the love of God and completely and fully returned it. Made of the flesh that evolved through cosmogenesis, made one with all of creation, when Christ initiates the divinization of creation, he initiates the divinization of all creation. Furthermore, when we acknowledge the sacredness of the evolving and emerging universe story, not only do we recognize that our anthropological dimension is derived from 13.7 billion years of cosmic creativity, but so too are our religious expressions. That is, rather than claiming that Earth has joined in the religious expression of the human, we can now concede that all human religions join in the religious expression of Earth. The cosmological understanding of religions better equips us for dealing with the ecological crisis, especially since no religion in its present form has been able to prevent or sufficiently address that crisis. Of the implications of adopting the universe story as our new cosmology can also offer insights into economics and ethics. Just as it is not possible to have healthy people on a sick planet, even with our best medical services, the human economy cannot flourish if Earth's economy is devastated. Just as Earth's health is primary and human health is derivative, Earth's economy is primary and human economy is derivative. To preserve the integrity of the Earth economy should be the first purpose of any human economic program, asserts Berry. On a finite planet, enhancing human prosperity at the expense of the planet is simply not sustainable. The resulting ecological debt must be paid. While a more organic economy that operates within the renewing capacities of Earth is sustainable, an extractive economy that is ecologically disruptive is a terminal economy. The extractive economy of non-renewable resources, such as oil or the oil sands, will inevitably reach its end since we live on a finite planet. No matter how extensive the reserves, the continuous depletion of those supplies will eventually result in their elimination. However, we have even taken certain renewing economies, such as agriculture and fishing, and turned them into non-renewable economies through soil degradation and overfishing. The universe story reminds us of our profound interconnectivity with the other beings and the systems of the planet, and recalls that in the phenomenal world, every entity has limits that must be respected. We need to live within the renewable limits of the Earth's biological and geological systems. We need to limit ourselves and temper our greed and consumption. In doing so, we can develop economic patterns that are mutually enhancing for the entire Earth community. Placing the common good above our individual desires, we can give priority to the macrophage needs of our bioregion, of our nation, and of our planet, rather than giving precedence to our microphage desires. Adopting the new cosmology as our functional cosmology reveals that ethics can no longer simply concern itself with the relations of humans to humans or humans to the divine, but must now also consider the relations of humans to the rest of creation. Therefore, to our moral sense of suicide, homicide, and genocide, we need to add a concern for biocide, the destruction of Earth's life systems, and geocide, the destruction of Earth itself. To limit our ethics to the former without concern for the latter would continue an anthropocentric ethic that has permitted us to devastate the planet with impunity and without being held to account. Because every entity in creation is loved by God as part of God's creation, and because every entity in creation plays a unique role in the universe story, advancing the storyline in accordance with its contribution, every entity has intrinsic value, not merely an instrumental value that is decreed by humans. Accordingly, certain rights and protections are extended to each entity by virtue of its existence. This is more important than ever, since humans have acquired such extensive power over the functioning of the planet. This form of ecological rights is not patterned on the moral agency of the human, where each right is accompanied by a concomitant duty. For instance, your right to free speech is accompanied by my duty to protect that freedom, with the converse also being true. Here I am talking about moral status as it applies to all creation. Thus, that which enhances the flourishing and sustainability of the common good, for instance the ecosystem, is to be encouraged. Moral status is revealed by the universe story, as revealed by the universe story, is not based on an anthropocentric notion of morality, reciprocity, or duties and rights. For although humans may be, in some advanced senses, the only measurer of things, it does not follow that humans are the only measure of things. When all rights are supposedly held by the human, and the worth of the rest of creation is determined by its utility to humanity, then the other-than-human world is vulnerable to exploitation by us. Our use of creation should maintain or enhance its integrity, its stability, and its beauty in all of its diversity. Harming any part of creation impedes its evolution toward fulfillment. That is, its place within the process of theosis or divinization. And this is an intervention by us that far exceeds our status in God's creation. An ethic informed by the universe story as new cosmology calls us to respect the telos, or ultimate purpose, of other entities and the system that sustains them. It is for these reasons that Thomas Berry declares that every entity has three fundamental rights. I'm going to show just a teeny little clip of Thomas Berry. In this time he's age 92. He's had some illness, and in 2 years later he passes away.
Rights come from existence. Right is simply the giving to every being its due. That's a brief definition of rights. And every being, to exist, has rights, has three rights. The right to be, the right to habitat, and the right to fulfill its role in the great community of existence.
It's okay. It is for these reasons that Tom Berry declares that every entity has three fundamental rights: a right to be, a right to fulfill its purpose, and a right to the resources that it requires to fulfill its purpose. While each of these rights is accorded to every entity, they are not accorded in the same way. Humans would have human rights, while fish would have fish rights. Bestowing human rights on a fish would be useless for the fish, just as according fish rights to the human would not serve the human at all well. Thus, all rights are relative and limited. It needs to be noted that the ecological ethic that is being advocated here runs the risk of being anti-human or socially irresponsible by marginalizing the disenfranchised economic classes. However, a proper application of the universe story as new cosmology would not celebrate the flourishing of the human at the expense of the ecosystem any more than it would celebrate the flourishing of the ecosystem at the expense of the human. Ultimately, the implications of adopting the epic of evolution as our new cosmology, as identified by Thomas Berry, can help to reinvent theology, economics, and ethics such that we begin to function in ways that foster a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship so that we can successfully address the ecological crisis that threatens our very existence. I would like to close with words from Pope Francis, spoken during his homily at his inauguration Mass of his Petrine ministry. The vocation of being a protector means protecting all creation, the beauty of the created world, as the book of Genesis tells us, and as St. Francis of Assisi showed us. It means respecting each of God's creatures and respecting the environment in which we live. Whenever human beings fail to live up to this responsibility, whenever we fail to care for creation and for our brothers and sisters, the way is open to destruction and hearts are hardened. To protect creation, to protect every man and every woman, to look upon them with tenderness and love, is to open up a horizon of hope. So, 감사합니다.